And all right, so welcome to the June meeting of English Language Testing Society, the June webinar of the English Language Testing Society, which of course is on validity this month, as we were just talking about. And the question, very relevant question, I hope, what does it mean for me? And again, as I was just saying, what does it mean for you as a classroom teacher? What does it mean for you if you're thinking more about large-scale assessment and interpreting numbers from, say, a TOEFL or an IELTS score? And I want to thank the SPA as our sponsor this month. So thank you very much. And I'm going to start right now with a little poll. So I'm going to launch this poll. Abaco Foundation, is that Letty? Is that Letty?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Change my name.
Yeah. I thought I recognized you, but I wasn't quite sure. Okay, let's start out with a little poll. I'm going to launch this poll on validity. So go ahead and give your answers. Has everyone finished?
Yes.
Okay, I'll go ahead and close it. And let's share the results. So I hope you can see, everyone should see the poll on the screen.
I think everybody is unsure.
Yeah. Well, your fearless leader here might be unsure too, but at least I can lead a discussion. I can define validity, one of the most difficult concepts in assessment, right? As Khalid was saying before we started. Yeah, I'm not sure is actually a very good answer. I consider validity when designing tests. 3 say yes, 1 says no. I know how to ensure validity. We got only 1 person answered. Yes. I can construct a validity argument, mixed bag, and I can instruct others, which, depending on your role, if you're a classroom teacher or if you have responsibility for other teachers, may or may not be an important thing for you. All right. Let's go ahead then and talk a little bit. And I asked everyone to bring a test with them that they would be willing and able to share. So if you've done that, thank you so much. And if not, we'll just try to work around that. So very, very basic. And again, I'm really thinking about classroom teachers. I don't want to get too theoretical about this today, although if you wanted to, we could. I'm really thinking about validity in very practical terms for classroom assessment, in terms of classroom assessment. And a basic definition of validity is, does the test measure what it intends to measure? I think on that we can all agree, right? What I hope we could all agree on is validity is the most important criterion. So although we might also think about reliability, practicality, authenticity, if our tests are not valid, then none of those other criteria are worth anything, right? They're completely meaningless, because if our test doesn't measure what it intends to measure, then what is the test doing? What are we measuring? What information are we getting about those who are our test takers, right? And let's remember that validity is not a light switch, right? A test, it's not something we turn on and off. This test is valid. That test is not valid. In my own work environment, I get asked that sometimes. Are these tests valid? And those that I'm answering would love a simple answer. Yes. Yes, of course they're valid, right? But I think we know that it's not that simple, right? It's a matter of degree, and how we measure that is a very qualitative experience of building a validity argument. I don't think and some of you might disagree, but I don't think we can really measure validity quantitatively. And quantitative studies of validity that I have seen often fall back to some degree or another to really measuring reliability and not really measuring validity. So let's again remember, and please jump in if you have any comments. I know this can, I know this is a big topic, and people may not agree, and that's fine. So again, validity is qualitative, and the way that we support validity is by developing a validity argument and demonstrating evidence. Again, not through numbers usually, or at least that's my belief, and there are others that would have another opinion on that. Validity depends on test construction to a great degree. The way that we make tests valid is by the way that we design our tests. And we want to remember that scores also have their own validity, which is separate to the construct validity of the test. So scores can be valid if they have given us the right kind of information, or if they have measured what we have intended to measure. If any of these concepts are not clear, I can try to elaborate a bit more. So please ask, please participate.
I'm just confusing about the validity, maybe thought of as a unitary. What do you mean unitary concept?
Right. So yeah, validity, and that was my next point, is that the one side in this argument, and that's really, it was originated, or at least given a lot of weight, by Samuel Messick at ETS in Princeton, said that there's only, validity exists as a unitary concept. It is whole, it cannot be divided, that there is simply validity. And though there may be different aspects, that validity is validity. It is one single concept. And when we want to measure validity, what we're measuring is simply validity. People like Cyril Weir in the UK made a very different kind of argument, that there are actually different kinds of validity. And sometimes we call it a checklist. What Cyril Weir proposed is that there is a checklist, so that construct validity, content validity, criterion validity, and cognitive validity would be qualitatively different things, that they're completely separate, and that we could measure each of these individually.
Okay, I have a question here. So going by that definition, your previous point says validity depends on test construction. I agree. But don't scores, if you separate scores from the test, aren't we doing something different? Because to me, the score tells you, I forgot my argument, but I think to me, scores is part of the validity when you construct a test. So I don't understand why it can also be more or less valid.
I'm sorry.
So you construct a test knowing that the score is going to be valid.
You're right.
So maybe how can they be more or less valid?
Okay, so if we want to talk about scoring validity, then let's remember that there is always a true score and an observed score. The true score is theoretical. And it can never be observed. So essentially, the argument is that a given student X, we want to measure their proficiency in speaking French. So it's just spoken language here, right? Yes. There is a true proficiency that could be represented as a score. But that true score is unknowable, actually. But we can produce an observed score. And that's the score, essentially, that's the grade, right? That's the result of the test when it's represented as a number. And that true score exists somewhere around the observed score. And here again, we're getting now into, to some degree, we're getting into reliability, but these concepts are so interwoven, right?
Yeah.
So scoring validity essentially is asking how valid scores are, if that makes sense. How valid are the observed scores? And you know, and when we get into criterion validity, which I want to get into in just a minute, maybe I can talk about more details of that concept. Okay. Good. Any other questions on this page? Comments? And feel free to disagree. I know this is a very controversial topic, but I think the most important thing, if we talk about these things and try to arrive at some clarity, and maybe if I help you, if you feel in any way that you're not quite sure what you believe, or you came here to learn something, maybe if I can clarify, maybe a discussion will help you clarify things in your mind, even if you don't necessarily agree with me, right? If it can kind of elucidate your own thoughts, that's, I think, a wonderful thing. So let's think about, I'm going to approach this, and whether you want to agree with Messick or Cyril Weir, I'm going to approach this as though there are different kinds of validity. You may say, well, this is all validity and these are aspects, and that's also fine. But let's talk about construct validity. So when we talk about construct validity, what we're talking about is the quality or the trait that we wish to measure. So in other words, to what extent does our test match the construct that we have defined? And to the degree that we can concretely and precisely define the construct, we can increase our construct validity. So I'll give you some examples in just a moment, but before I do that, I want to give you some examples of how things might go wrong. And there are three ways there are probably more, but there are three really classic ways that things might go wrong in construct validity. One is construct underrepresentation, when we measure too narrowly, or we only measure part of the construct. And I may have used this example before, but I'll use it again. A grammar test on adverb clauses that only tests time clauses. And I'm pulling this out because it's a very real example for me that I dealt with in my own teaching situation. Although we were teaching adverb clauses and many kinds of adverb clauses, the test focused only on time clauses. This is a classic example of construct underrepresentation. We're not measuring the entire construct. Construct irrelevant variance is just the opposite, measuring too widely and including things in our test that we don't aim to measure. So if we're trying to, for example, measure students' ability to read, and we give them a reading text that they've never seen before in a timed testing situation in which there's a lot of special vocabulary about cars. And some students love cars and they know a lot about cars and they might know a lot of this vocabulary, and other students don't know much about cars. And we don't aim to measure their knowledge about cars. We aim to measure their proficiency in reading. But what we've done is we've brought in another concept, right? We're essentially measuring car-related vocabulary. So this would be an example of construct irrelevant variance. Another threat to construct validity is indirect testing. And just again, to be a little bit philosophical here, or theoretical here, as we were talking about just a minute ago, a score is always an approximation. An observed score is always an approximation of a true score. So even when we measure directly, we only have an approximation. When we do indirect testing, so for example, if I say I'm giving a reading test and I'm going to select 20 vocabulary words, and I expect all my students to know these because they would be relevant I'm going to select 20 academic words from the academic word list because these would be relevant in any academic reading. So I give them a vocabulary test of 20 academic words, and I call that my reading test. And I'm going to make an argument, again, a validity argument here. I'm going to make an argument that because they need those words in order to do academic reading, that this is a valid test. But what I've done is I'm not testing reading skills directly. I'm testing reading skills indirectly. And what's the problem here is that a score is already, or an observed score is already imprecise. So now we're introducing an estimate. We're not introducing an indirect score here or an imprecise score. We're introducing an estimate of an indirect or imprecise score, right? So this is, one of the threats to construct validity that is created when we test indirectly. And if you'd like, I can give you more examples of indirect testing. But let's go ahead and let's look at some construct examples. I'm just taking a few here. Reading, writing, and speaking. So if we want to test reading, we might be interested in things like reading for main ideas, reading for details, reading for inference, reading and being able to identify significant vocabulary at a certain level. If they're intermediate readers, we might identify significant, what we consider to be significant intermediate vocabulary. Or very different from that, identifying words in context. So taking words that we predict that our students, our test takers won't know, probably won't know, and seeing if they can use test taking or reading strategies, sorry, not test taking, but reading strategies in order to identify those words. Understanding cohesion in reading, understanding points of view of different people quoted, if you have that kind of article, right? Where different points of view are represented in the same article, or maybe the author's opinion. These would all be examples of parts of a construct. And we don't need to include all of these to create a valid test. But if we're only testing details, and I've seen so many tests that teachers have created where the only thing tested are details. And I think this is a less valid reading test because it creates, if we only test details, it creates a construct underrepresentation. And then for writing, we might want to consider content, organization, grammar, and vocabulary. And I've seen so many writing tests where really only grammar is considered. That's another example of a construct underrepresentation. On the other hand, if you ask students to write about democracy in America, right? Well, what if they don't know? What if they don't have enough information about democracy in America? Then we're introducing a construct irrelevant variance because students may not be able to demonstrate their true ability because they simply don't know the content, right? So that in that case, we're not really measuring writing. We're measuring something else that we don't intend to measure. Again, construct examples in speaking, maybe fluency, coherence, grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation. Again, I've seen so many tests with a built-in construct underrepresentation where so much emphasis is put on maybe oral grammar or pronunciation. So these, without considering fluency, coherence, or the use of levels appropriate vocabulary. So these are examples of constructs that we could build into a validity argument about construct validity. Okay. Going on to content, and by the way, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, as I'm also working a lot in large-scale test construction, and construct validity is really the concept that is, it's the overwhelming construct in, the overwhelming concept of validity in large-scale assessment. When we're at the level, which I kind of want to concentrate more on today, when we're at the level of the classroom assessment, content validity becomes the most important concept.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
So going back to the previous slide, I'm looking at the two tests that I have in front of me, that samples. And is it possible to have, actually the previous one, is it possible to have underrepresentation and irrelevant variance in the same test? Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Because I see, I'm identifying as you're speaking, I'm looking at this and I go, yeah, this is what's happening. Thank you. I'm still not sure about indirect testing, but it will come to me. But thank you.
Okay, and we can talk about that more later at the end if you like. Yeah, Mohammed, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just to make sure about the indirect testing. So sometimes I assess or I test my students about the grammar, for example, the conditional sentences, or about the transferring from an adjective sentence to an adverb. So when I test them, there's some skills about the spelling and capitalization. Does it mean about indirect testing for the contrast validity?
I would think of that more as constructor relevant variance. I mean, I'm assuming that this is a grammar test, and you're calling this a grammar test, not a writing test, right?
It's a sometimes I make some mistakes about the spelling or the capitalization when they write the sentence.
But what kind of test is it?
It is just to write, in a grammatical sentence from another way. For example, to transfer, for example, Jack is a good player. I transferred it to an adverb from the good to well. So Jack plays well. So some students, for example, they write the word Jack with a small j, not a capital J. Mm-hmm. And they make some mistake. When I make some mistakes, they are angry. Okay, they are mad at me because they told me I did it right. Why didn't you give me a full mark for this sentence? I told them there's some spelling mistake.
So again, what I'm asking you is, do you consider this, I don't know the level of these students, but do you consider this a writing test or a grammar test?
A grammar test, that's writing test.
Right. Then in that case, I would probably mark it for their own benefit, but I wouldn't count it against them, because actually they've demonstrated that they know the grammar, and that's what we're trying to measure.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I think that.
So is it like indirect testing?
I would call it more construct irrelevant variance, because you're marking them wrong on something that you don't intend to measure.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's that kind of assessment would be the discrete point assessment. You are at the same time assessing, correcting the grammar, but you are paying attention as well to capitalization and other spelling mistakes. But if you don't score them, if you only focus in scoring on the grammatical answers, but you make some corrective feedback about the spelling and the letters, that would be beneficial, but not to punish them, taking away marks from them because of something they were not focusing on. In a grammar exercise, they'll be focusing on rules and grammar. But it would be kind of you to remind them of the error, but not to punish them.
Yeah,
I got you. Thank you, Khalid. Thank you all. Yes.
Let's go ahead, just because I want to give a lot of you time for this. So let's go ahead. So content validity, again, the most important consideration in classroom testing. And the key question here is, does the test measure what was taught in class? If you test what you teach, you're increasing content validity. So I think it's very easy to think of, in the case of a grammar test, like Mohammed's example, if he teaches the present perfect, he tests the present perfect. That's so straightforward and so simple. But let's think of some other aspects of content validity. For example, does the test look like the practice that you did in class? Does the format of the test ask the students to do the same thing that they did when they practiced and they were learning before the test? Or do you throw them some completely new format that they may never have seen before? Again, does the test include only a small part of what was taught? That goes back to construct underrepresentation. And does the test include vocabulary, grammar concepts that were not taught in class? Are you suddenly bringing in something that was never taught in class before? That would be an example of construct relevant variance. And it's also a big threat to content validity. If you give them new content on a test that they have not seen in class. And again,
in that sense, Michael, does the answer to number 2, is that, if you say yes, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Does the test measure what was taught in class?
No, that one is obvious. But the next one, does it look like practice and exercises that were done in class?
Yeah, well, that builds content validity, but in your situation, there may or may not be reasons why you would like to make it similar or different. And that, so many situational variables.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Criterion validity, and I think we were talking about this earlier. How does the test compare with another measure? And you as classroom teachers have an amazing amount of criterion validity. In large-scale testing, we have to build criterion validity in a completely different way through kind of statistic modeling. But you as classroom teachers, if you are a classroom teacher, have an amazing capacity that's much better than any statistic modeling, and that is yourself and your knowledge of your students. So if you give a test, I mean, you know, usually, if you have your own students, you know who's doing well in class.
Right.
And if you give a test where everybody does the same, or if you give a test where the ones that are struggling do well and the ones that are your top students don't do well, there's a problem, right? There's a problem with your new test that you've just developed, and you have a gut feeling for that, right? So when we compare a new test that we just developed with another test, with your own observations, your knowledge, your gut feelings as a teacher, with the homework, the projects, the assignments, other thing that students are getting graded on, that's a great indication. And being closer to the source is a wonderful thing for validity that we all, I mean, I'm a classroom teacher too. We all as classroom teachers have, and this is not something that can be measured with statistics and numbers, you know, and my role as a large scale assessment person, we love our statistics and numbers. This is not something to be measured that way, but I honestly believe it's a much better assessment. It's a much better way of valuing validity, because you know your students, and when you see how they perform on a test, you can make some judgment about that test. And then there's also another kind of criterion validity, which is predictive, right? Can we make inferences about a future performance? So when we give a test, does it tell us that the student is ready to go on to the next unit or the next class? We would like our test to give us some information about this. And to the extent that it can do that, it has a lot of predictive validity. Or how would the student perform outside the testing environment in the real world? To the degree that the test can do that, it has a lot of predictive validity. If the student can do well on the test, but the only thing it tells you is that he mastered that test, and it has no bearing on how he performs outside the classroom, then there's a very low degree of predictive validity. And finally, cognitive validity, which is a newer concept. And if you're interested in this concept, if you're really interested in this, then I would suggest looking up John Field, no relation, at the Center for Research in English Language Teaching and Assessment at the University of Bedfordshire in the UK. So that would be a good place to start if you're interested in this cognitive validity. But essentially what this asks is, to what extent are the cognitive processes that are used outside the testing world used in order to answer test questions? And let's think about that. How about a multiple choice reading test? How much cognitive validity would you say a multiple choice reading test has? What do you think? Christine.
I'm going to say very small.
Yeah, right. When outside of testing, outside of the testing environment, would a student need to answer multiple choice questions, right? Now there's a counter argument to that, which I'm going to offer in a few minutes, but it's very obvious that we could probably make an argument that there's low cognitive validity. How about a matching, Mohammed Shaban? How about a matching vocabulary test?
I would say low too.
Yeah, let's see, low, right? Very low, right? When is someone ever going to do that outside the testing environment? How about Mohammed? How about a speaking interview?
Very technical, and this student, they can practice all about the target language, but also at the same time it's so challenging for them. But this challenging time, it's a scaffolding with them about making sentences in a good way. They can try to to practice what they have learned. So their cognitive skills, they can imagine, they can predict about the target language that are tested for the speaking interview.
Okay, so I think the question here, though, about cognitive validity means what kinds of skills do they need to take a speaking interview in a test? And would those be the same kind of skills that they would use outside the testing environment? So in other words, if you're going to test students, if you're going to give them a speaking test and you bring them into you one by one and you ask them some questions and they have to answer those questions, how much cognitive validity is there in that exercise? Letty's saying a lot. Yeah, absolutely, right? That's exactly the kind of thing that we would want them to do outside the testing environment, is if someone asks them a question, they can answer, right? Mm-hmm. Lots of cognitive validity. How about a timed writing? Khalid.
Sorry, timed writing.
Timed writing. What would you say for cognitive validity in a timed writing?
I didn't understand well. Maybe could you repeat, please?
Yes. What kind of cognitive validity would you give to a timed writing test?
I didn't get it right. What comes just before writing? Time?
Time. You can see it on your screen, maybe. Timed writing.
I am using a mobile phone and
right. Christine, we'll go back to you. That's fine.
Well, I'm of two minds because I think timed writing is so, we don't use it in the real world in many cases, but it's used a lot at universities where you have so much time to answer questions.
Yeah, so maybe mixed, right? We could, yeah, mixed. We could argue against it, but we could also give good reasons for it.
Let me argue in favor of it. I think there's high because even though you may not be, timed writing has to do with how fast you can make an argument and write it down.
Exactly.
So how fast you can make an argument in the real world happens all the time. So I would argue that is high. Okay. Even though you may not be writing it, the ability that you have to write it down, get your ideas concretely and make your argument isn't a skill that you do all the time, in and outside.
Yeah,
I will answer now because I can read it. Anyway, all the previously presented types of exams and the question about the degree of validity depends on the context. For example, in my case, timed writing would be a very valid exercise for students in the upper secondary school because they are preparing to enter university, and especially that kind of writing would be very helpful for their studies at university. So it has a sense, it makes a sense to evaluate their timed writing. But otherwise, if we are preparing people for a different purpose, it depends always on the context and on the purpose. The validity acquires, a test could acquire validity according to the argument. Why are we using this kind or that kind, multiple choice or grammar? They could fit in some context and be very valid, very acceptable, and not fit in others because a test may be valid for a purpose, but not for another one. And I always conclude it with the same thing. It depends on the context.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In the interest of time, let's just go on. I'm going to share very quickly a test that I'm using. We have first some instructions, but it's pretty straightforward. And this is, by the way, this is not the actual test. This is a PDF. This is an online test. So I'm just showing you a PDF of it. So you're not seeing exactly what they're taking, but you get the idea. Here is a text that they need to read. And then they have 3 kinds of questions. And I'm having trouble scrolling here. Let's see if I can make this work. Great. Here's some main idea questions. Let me maybe scroll up a little bit. So what they need to do here is they need to match. Sorry, I'm hearing some background. Maybe if you could mute for a minute. Okay, maybe that helped. This main idea check, what they need to do here is they need to read these little blurbs and they need to choose from a drop-down menu which paragraph this main idea matches to. The next, they have a set of detail questions about details in the text, and for every question, they get true, false, or not given. And there are not too many not givens. They're mainly true or false. And then they get this vocabulary in context, where there were some highlighted words in the text that we would not expect them to know. And they need to read another sentence which uses the vocabulary in a maybe similar way, and then guess which of the words would fit in to make the to complete the sentence. Okay, so this is our test. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to very quickly make a validity argument. And I know that we won't all agree, but I'm still going to make this validity argument. So basically, about construct definition, we're using a pre-academic text at an upper, intermediate, or advanced level to demonstrate comprehension of main ideas, details, and the ability to predict meaning of unknown vocabulary. This is what we want to test. Other things like opinion of the author, different opinions of different people mentioned, we're not really testing those things. Okay, so our construct is limited to 3 things: main ideas, details, and predicting vocabulary and context. This text was taken from an older edition of the same textbook that students are using. So they have never seen this text before, but it's the same level. It's on the same general topic as what they've used in class. So in that sense, there's a lot of content validity. The text is fresh. It hasn't been seen before. It's not something we've read in class and discussed. So we're trying to isolate the reading skill only and not test memory or something that they may have been exposed to before. Okay. As I mentioned, the test is divided into 3 parts that tests main ideas, details, and predicting meaning and vocabulary. It's a direct test. It doesn't ask for any oral or written production. So there's nothing to muddy that measurement. They don't have to produce any kind of writing. They don't have to identify grammar forms. They don't have to memorize vocabulary. So there's no indirect testing. It's a very direct test. As I mentioned, not every aspect of reading is actually tested. Because the text was taken from an older version of the book, we have a lot of content validity. The exercises in the book in no way look like this test. The exercises in the book were meant to aid in their development of reading skills. They weren't meant to test reading. So in that way, the test format looks very different. But then the objective is also different, right? One is meant to support and develop reading skills. The other is meant to test. So we could give it some negative in terms of content validity. It doesn't look a lot like what they had to do in class. So we might criticize it on that. In terms of criterion validity, there's no information really. We don't, in our context right now, we're not comparing it to any other test, but in a real use of that test, we could do that. So theoretically, we could have a lot of criterion validity because we can compare our own students who we know and their performance on this test. In terms of cognitive validity, this multiple choice and matching format is very low, but they are asked to skim and scan for main ideas and details. That might be cognitively valid. They're asked to understand vocabulary and context. They see some words they don't know. They're asked to predict the meaning of those words. That could be cognitively valid. And also, the multiple choice and matching format adds to the reliability of the test, which it supports construct validity. It may not support cognitive validity, but it does support construct validity. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do now, and let's look at the time. We don't have so much time left, so I'm going to give you 5 minutes instead of 10 minutes. I would like you to look at your own test that you brought with you today and take about 5 minutes to construct a validity argument. If you think your test has a lot of validity, I want you to be able to present that to us. If you think your test has low validity, that's okay. Tell us what you could do to make it more valid. All right? So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. And when we come back, we'll hear from everyone. And you will be able to share your screen and share your test, okay? So let's take about 5 minutes right now, and then we'll come back.
Can you put up the validity argument slide?
And in the interest of time, maybe someone would like to volunteer to be first. I've stopped my share, so if you want to, whoever's first can share their screen and show their test. Anyone want to volunteer?
If nobody else will, I will.
Please do, please do.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen.
And I'm so sorry that we don't have more time. I would love to hear from all of you.
So this is a test from one of our teachers in Mexico and that we're training. And so this is a grammar test. And what I'm looking at the first section is, I would say it has a lot of...
Sorry, we're seeing your home screen, your desktop.
Oh, sorry. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. So it has this part first identifying tenses, or if I can call it that for the lack of time. And then it has this write the titles into column, the correct column, fiction, non-fiction. So I don't know, I don't understand the grammar part in this. I don't see the relevance. And then it goes back to grammar, countable and uncountable nouns. And then it has this fine body organs. And so to me, it has very low content validity. It has irrelevant variance as well. And I don't know if all of this was taught. I don't know how. Yeah, I think there's some indirect testing too. So I think I need more time to see how I can make it more valid, probably eliminate the parts that are not grammar, if that is what she intends to measure, grammar. Because it seems like I don't know if she's testing vocabulary here, but she's giving the word, you just have to look it up. So if she had described the part of the body or just put it here, I just don't know how I would make it better. I need more time, but I see that as is, it has some issues.
Okay. Yeah, that first part, I'm also curious. The first part, in a sense, looks like maybe the best. How can I say this? The best part of the test. Can you share?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes, I would agree with you.
Sorry, could you share again? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Where did my thing go? Share screen. And just, there we go.
But what I would be concerned about, if we look at the directions here, the instructions, what's being tested here is really a lot of declarative knowledge,
right,
about English grammar,
right,
and not really the ability to use this or recognize it or get any meaning out of it, right?
Right. And all of the examples are all over the place. They don't, and this is for middle school in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know if we were able to answer number 3 and 4. I mean, 2, 3, and 4, it's just, I don't know. Yeah, I do have problems with this. And yeah, I think you're right. It's declarative knowledge for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how successful they were.
Right. And again, we don't know the context, so I don't want to be too critical, but right. Great. Thank you, Letty. Let's go ahead. Who would like to go next? Khalid, oh, maybe you're having trouble sharing because you're on a phone.
I try. I'll do my best. Let's try.
Okay.
I can't find it. Anyway, if I can't share it, I can talk about it at least because I have it in front of me on the computer.
All right.
It's the national test for students of upper secondary level in Morocco, which is going to take place in a couple of days. Next Monday, next Tuesday, they have already started this morning, and it is as it is said in the introduction, is a summative written achievement test produced by the Moroccan National Center of Evaluation and Exams. It is taken for certification purposes. Well, that already starts saying something. The purpose of this exam is certification. That's the degree which would allow the student to go to higher studies. At the end of the secondary school education, it is administered to all eligible candidates. The content, and that also gives information about content validity. The content of the exam paper is directly based on the national curriculum and aims at assessing these knowledge and skills in reading, vocabulary, grammar, language functions, and writing. And when we analyze the example of this exam, we find exactly what is said here. Some exercises about vocabulary, a text to read and answer with true, false, with justification, choosing a synonym for a word, correcting the underlined word, that's also vocabulary and the language. A second part, which is devoted only to grammar, and the exercises are directly related to all what they have been studying during the year. Passive voice, reported speech, only grammar, pure and hard grammar. Then comes the last section, which is the writing, where they write something they have already been trained to do. Write an email to a friend, write a formal letter. You have develop a topic sentence into a paragraph to tell a story, exactly what they have been trained to during the whole year. So it's valid, reliable, easy to score. And that's why in all national context of assessment, they tend to prioritize content because it's easily measurable, not miserable, but measurable, easily measurable, and make the validity easier to attain. The argument of validity is already written and is already there, so we can produce kind of repeating the same structure of the test year after year, and that really is a guarantee of validity in this context of national and educational context. That's all what I can say about it, and I'm really sorry I couldn't show you, but I have already sent an email to you, Michael, with the example of this the latest framework of reference. This one I have been reading a part of, and an example of the whole exam. I can also facilitate the links later by email to all of you interested in knowing something about it.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like you believe this is a very valid test, and I'm assuming that there's some kind of board or committee that creates these tests in the Ministry of Education. Is that, and they're well trained and they know what they're doing. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, that's exactly. It's a high mandate, and people who prepare the exams are professionals in only evaluation and assessment during the years, and they have like an expertise in only assuring the validity of tests.
Okay, great. Maybe thank you, Howard. Maybe we have time for one more, and I know it's almost 5 o'clock. If you need to go, I completely understand. But if there's one more person, Mohammed, would you like to share yours? Please.
My pleasure to share, but excuse me to my performance for evaluate and analyze the test.
We're all here to learn, right?
Okay. Do you see now the test?
Yes, yes.
And this is the test book of the curriculum for the high school. It was a previous curriculum in our school because it was changed recently, and it's for the high school. It's about the reading test. I evaluated it with a previous course. I have it in a long profile, a long PDF file. It's about a reading story for the high school, and the several level maybe it's about the B1 plus alphabet. Okay, it's about here about the validity about the test. It's about to test a student how are they able to comprehend the meaning from any authentic test, because it's related about the concept. What did they learn about the skills from maybe reading a story, reading some news, some articles, some essays. So they may have some challenges, to infer and to find the meaning of the whole story of the whole text, because they read some similar stories, but with different topics, with different scenario. Okay, this is here about this one. So about maybe it's about some can say some. There's some difference of the content of validity a little bit. So some students may maybe have some negative washback, for the impact after the test, because they're not aware of the some skills. For example, to be able to comprehend some authentic articles. About the exercise, about the exercise to answer this kind of question. There's one question. It's about multiple choice. Of course, apparently it is low, but it's challenging for them. It's not low because each question here has a different validity content for that, or the different reading skills. For example, the first question, it's about the main idea, so reading for gist. Okay, the other one, it's about some related to the detailed, especially for the question number 4 in the line 24, and also line 20, question number 3. But when you see the last question, how do you think the men and the extract are? Sometimes it's challenging, it's confusing, because it's related to the, apparently to the personal opinion for the student.
But this is
so it needs some yes.
But this is inference. This is I think this is an inference question, right?
Yes, inference question. But for the students, they're not familiar with this kind of question. Okay, they're familiar with some direct questions. This kind of questions they need to practice more, because especially for some formative assessment, they test some easiest, some simplistic reading articles. So they are more direct, okay? So it's measure all the content of the, what they have learned directly without any concept of inference, interpretation behind this one. This is what it's all about. For the teachers, it's easy to mark and they know about the answers because, his academic level, his level is higher. But for the students, it's too challenging because all these questions has various validity from the inference, from the concurrent criterion, and the constructions validity. That's all from me. Thank you.
So, Mohammed, let me just jump in here and say that when I'm looking at these questions,
yes,
when I think about construct validity, I think that we've got a lot of, it's very high, right?
Yes, very high, yeah.
But what you're telling me is maybe there's a problem with the content validity because the students haven't practiced, especially question number 7, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
And what about question number 6? Is that something that they would practice in class or not?
The same thing, because this word slip away, okay, it needs some higher cognitive skills for them. Maybe, okay, they didn't come across this word or this phrase.
But they're asked to predict.
They ask to predict, yeah.
Right.
And the main obstacle in our class is that they're, okay, they have familiar with some direct, okay, validity, some with the construction, not about predict or unfair, yeah.
Okay, so let me just, Leslie, go ahead, please.
Yeah, 2 questions. Is it possible, he kept referring to like every question has a different content validity. Is it possible to do that? Because that would require a lot of thinking now, because I want to just talk about content validity in the whole test and the whole section per se. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we need to approach it per question. And my second question was to Mohammed, is this a final test? Or is it part of your formative? I
forgot. Okay, this is a summative test. Yeah, this is the final one.
Yes, because to me, a summative test should be just a summative test should be, and this is my opinion, just a confirmation of what your formative assessment has been telling you, right? Like there should not be surprises in the summative assessment, and I could be alone in this.
No. I agree with you. That's what this is what should for this book. Should have done for this test. That's why I'm discussing for that. Should be based on the formative and the about maybe just what you said, that similar, maybe the same track, what they have learned. Not something is astonishing, something is new for or maybe a new challenge for the learners and the students. I agree with you, Letty.
Can I just jump in? I mean, in the beginning, we were talking about these 2 very different views of validity, the unitary concept and the checklist concept. So if we approach this from the let's say if we approach this from the checklist concept, Mohammed, we might say this test has a lot of construct validity. Let's give it a check. This test has problems with its content validity. Let's see if we can fix it somehow, right? So we might say that there's a conflict here between construct and content validity. But if you believe in this unitary concept, then that's going to be harder to solve, right? How valid is this test? So I just wanted to bring that up because it's going back to that idea. Is it a unitary concept, or is validity more of a checklist of kinds of validity?
I think it's not unitary, and it needs some checklists to make it okay, you can say more comprehensive for the learners.
And then even, Mohammed, I'm going to suggest, so if there's a problem with content, which you're suggesting, really, there's a problem with content validity because teachers don't teach these things, then do we want to change the test, or do we want to see that as a kind of positive washback and say, well, maybe teachers should test inference, maybe, sorry, not test, but teach. Maybe teachers should teach inference. Maybe they should teach predicting unfamiliar vocabulary. So maybe this test has a kind of positive washback.
Mm-hmm. For me, to make it a positive washback, is to have more than another question to answer this kind of task. It's not all. It's not about. It needs another question, maybe a matching or gap fill, or for the vocabulary and context, and also to an easy question to focus on just a specific skill, a specific construct, not various for them. Maybe, for example, that we imagine that for this question have some detailed or main listening for gist, and maybe for the matching, okay, it's about maybe inferring. Okay, maybe some inferring validity, and the last question gap fill some detailed related to the vocabulary and context. Okay. But to can say together all these validity types and the one question, for me it leads to a negative washback, not a positive one. This is from my opinion.
Okay. Well, we're a bit over time. Mohammed, if you could stop your share for just a second.
Yes, okay. Thank you for letting me this chance. Thank you.
No, wonderful, wonderful. And I'm sorry we didn't have more time. I'm going to share my screen again just because I need to plug our sponsor. So thank you. I'm sorry if you are unhappy about leaving now. I'm sorry if you're happy about leaving now. I'm sorry to have kept you. But in any case, thank you for listening. Thank you for participating. Thank you to ELTS for providing this. And thank you to the Speaking Proficiency Assessment, SPA, for sponsoring us. And I hope to see you next month. And thanks again for coming.
Don't forget to share it.
The PowerPoint?
The PowerPoint, so we can study it.
I will do that.
Thank you, Michael. Bye, everybody.
See you next
time. Thank you, Michael. It was very informative for all of you. And I was so enjoyed and I got a lot of information for all of you. Thank you very much.
Great. And I hope to see you next month.
Okay. I'll see you soon. Next month. Yeah. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you all and greetings from Morocco.
Oh, great.
Wish good luck to all my students who are going to have the final exam in few days.
Good luck. Good luck.
The same thing. We have some final exam in the coming days. Yeah, next week. Yeah.
Good luck in Saudi Arabia.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Have a good time. Goodbye.